I had been dreaming of this moment for 32 years, ever since I was 7 years old and watched the Blue Angels perform at the County Air Show. I knew that flying was not just what I wanted to do. It was who I was meant to be. For 15 years, I saved every penny I could. I worked double shifts at the diner, sold my grandmother's jewelry, and lived in a studio apartment with no air conditioning just to afford the tuition for Elite Aviation Academy. This was not just any flight school. This was the most prestigious civilian pilot training program in the country, where they taught you to fly aircraft that most people only see in movies. The night before I left for the academy, I sat on my kitchen floor surrounded by flight manuals I had memorized cover to cover. My hands were shaking as I packed my worn leather flight bag, the one I had bought at a garage sale and carried to every practice session at the local airport. Inside were my logbooks, my certificates from the cheap flight simulators I had practiced on for years, and a photo of my father in his Air Force uniform. He had died when I was 12, but not before he told me that the sky belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. "Sarah," he had said, his voice weak from the cancer that was taking him, "do not let anyone tell you that you are not good enough to fly. The planes do not care if you are rich or poor. They only care if you have the heart of a pilot." The drive to Elite Aviation Academy took 6 hours through the Nevada desert. As I pulled into the parking lot, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The facility looked like something from a military base, with pristine white hangars and aircraft that gleamed in the morning sun. This was where dreams became reality. I grabbed my flight bag and walked toward the registration building, trying not to notice the other students unloading their cars. Designer flight suits hung in garment bags. Expensive leather luggage sat beside brand new iPads and high-tech flight computers. One man was talking loudly on his phone about how his father had pulled strings to get him into the program. My entire outfit cost less than his sunglasses. At the registration desk, a woman with perfectly styled hair looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Name?" she asked, not bothering to smile. "Sarah Mitchell," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She flipped through a stack of papers with manicured fingernails. "Ah yes, scholarship student. You will be in Dormitory C, Room 12. Your assigned instructor is Colonel James Harrison. Try not to be late for orientation." The way she said scholarship student made it sound like a disease, but I held my head high and took my room key. I had worked too hard to let anyone make me feel small on my first day. Walking across the campus, I felt the weight of stares from other students. Their conversations stopped when I passed. Whispers followed in my wake. I clutched my flight bag tighter and reminded myself why I was here. I was not here to make friends. I was here to learn how to fly the aircraft of my dreams. That evening at orientation, I sat in the back of the auditorium and listened as the academy director explained the program. Advanced flight training, military-grade simulators, the chance to pilot aircraft that most civilian pilots never even see. By the end of the 18-week program, graduates would be qualified to fly some of the most sophisticated planes in private aviation. It was everything I had ever wanted. As I looked around at my fellow students, I made a silent promise to myself. I would prove that I belonged here. I would show them that passion and determination mattered more than money and connections. I had no idea that some people would do anything to make sure I failed. My first morning at Elite Aviation Academy, I arrived at the flight line 30 minutes early. I wanted to make a good impression. I needed to prove that I deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. Colonel James Harrison was waiting by the aircraft assigned to me for the day. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. While the other students had been assigned newer Cessna aircraft with modern avionics, mine looked like it had been pulled from a museum. The paint was faded, the interior was worn, and when I did my pre-flight inspection, I noticed several items that seemed off. "Problem, Mitchell?" Colonel Harrison asked, appearing beside me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. He was a large man with cold gray eyes and a military bearing that he used like a weapon. "No, sir," I replied, checking the oil levels. "Just being thorough." "Good. We would not want any accidents on your first day." The way he said accidents made it clear he was not talking about safety. During the flight, every system seemed to malfunction at the worst possible moment. The radio crackled with static whenever I tried to communicate with the tower. The navigation system gave incorrect readings. The engine sputtered during what should have been routine maneuvers. Back on the ground, Colonel Harrison shook his head in disappointment. "Sloppy flying, Mitchell. Maybe you should stick to serving coffee instead of trying to fly planes." The other students were watching. Some looked uncomfortable, but none of them said anything. A few actually laughed. This pattern continued for weeks. I would be assigned the oldest aircraft with the most problems. During simulator sessions, my assigned machine would freeze or give false readings. When I complained, I was told that a real pilot should be able to handle any equipment. The worst part was not the broken equipment. It was the constant feeling that I was being watched, judged, and found wanting. Other students received patient instruction and encouragement. I received criticism and contempt. "You are too emotional," Colonel Harrison would say after I struggled with a particularly difficult landing in crosswinds. "Aviation requires precision, not feelings." "You lack the natural instincts," he told me when I asked for clarification on conflicting instructions. "Some people are born to fly, others are born to watch from the ground." But I kept detailed notes of every incident, every piece of faulty equipment, every snide comment. Every time I was given different instructions than my classmates. I documented everything in a small notebook that I kept hidden in my flight bag. During the 5th week of training, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I was doing a routine pre-flight inspection when I noticed sugar crystals around the fuel cap of my assigned aircraft. Someone had poured sugar into my fuel tank, hoping to destroy the engine during flight. That night, I confronted my roommate about what I had found. She was one of the few students who had shown me any kindness, and I thought she might listen. "Sarah, you need to be careful what you say," she whispered, looking around nervously. "Colonel Harrison has connections everywhere. If you make accusations without proof, you will be expelled." "But I have proof," I said, showing her photos I had taken of the sugar crystals. She looked at the pictures and her face went pale. "Promise me you will not do anything stupid. These people have power. They can destroy your career before it even starts." The next morning, I found my locker had been broken into. All my documentation was gone. My notebook with months of evidence had vanished. When I reported the theft, I was told that students were responsible for their own belongings. That afternoon, during what was supposed to be my final certification flight, everything went wrong at once. The engine lost power during takeoff. The landing gear warning lights started flashing. The radio went completely dead. Somehow, I managed to bring the aircraft down safely, but the landing was hard. As I climbed out of the cockpit, shaking with adrenaline and fear, Colonel Harrison was waiting with a clipboard and a satisfied smile. "That was the most dangerous display of incompetence I have ever witnessed," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You put this entire facility at risk." A crowd of students and instructors had gathered. They all stared at me like I was a criminal. Some were recording with their phones. "I want this student removed from the program immediately," Colonel Harrison continued. "She is a danger to herself and others." Standing there on the tarmac, covered in sweat and humiliation, I realized that this had all been planned. They had sabotaged my aircraft, stolen my evidence, and now they were using my struggle to survive their sabotage as proof that I did not belong. But the worst was yet to come. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. I spent the entire night packing my dorm room, trying to figure out how to defend myself without the evidence that had been stolen from my locker. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Colonel Harrison's satisfied smirk and hear the laughter of the other students. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked into the conference room where my fate would be decided. The academy director, Dr. William Chambers, sat at the head of a long table. Colonel Harrison was beside him, along with two other instructors I did not recognize. They all wore expressions of cold professionalism that made my stomach turn. "Miss Mitchell," Dr. Chambers began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "We are here to review your performance in this program and determine whether you should continue." I took a deep breath and tried to steady my voice. "Sir, I believe there have been some misunderstandings about my performance. I have been assigned faulty equipment repeatedly, and I have reason to believe—" "That is enough," Colonel Harrison interrupted. "We are not here to listen to excuses." Dr. Chambers opened a thick folder and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement. "According to your instructors, you have consistently demonstrated poor judgment, inadequate technical skills, and a dangerous lack of situational awareness." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I knew these allegations were fabricated, but sitting in that room surrounded by authority figures, I felt powerless to defend myself. "Furthermore," Dr. Chambers continued, "your aircraft yesterday experienced multiple system failures that our maintenance team has determined were caused by pilot error and negligence." "That is not true," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Someone sabotaged my fuel system. I found sugar crystals around the fuel cap." Colonel Harrison laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Sugar crystals? Miss Mitchell, do you realize how paranoid you sound? Are you suggesting that someone at this prestigious institution would engage in sabotage?" "I am not paranoid. I documented everything. I took photos." "Photos that conveniently disappeared?" Dr. Chambers asked, raising an eyebrow. "How convenient that your evidence vanished just when you needed it most." The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I could see that they had planned this perfectly. They had destroyed my evidence, and now they were using my claims as proof of my instability. "Miss Mitchell," Dr. Chambers said, his tone shifting to what might have been mistaken for sympathy, "it is clear that you are not suited for advanced aviation training. This program requires a level of mental toughness and technical competence that you simply do not possess." Colonel Harrison leaned forward with a predatory smile. "Perhaps you should consider a career more suited to your limitations. Food service, retail, something that does not require life-and-death decision-making." The laughter that followed his comment was quiet but devastating. These men were enjoying my destruction. "Based on the evidence before us," Dr. Chambers announced, "we have no choice but to terminate your enrollment in this program, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the premises within the hour." The words hit me like a physical assault. 15 years of saving, 32 years of dreaming. It was all ending in this sterile conference room with men who had decided I was not worthy of their world. "You cannot do this," I whispered, tears starting to blur my vision. "I worked too hard, I sacrificed too much." "Miss Mitchell," Dr. Chambers said, closing my file with finality, "this decision is not negotiable. Security will help you gather your belongings." I stood up on shaking legs, my dreams crumbling around me like a house of cards. As I walked toward the door, Colonel Harrison called out one final insult. "Miss Mitchell, flying is not for everyone. Some people are meant to stay on the ground." The security guard who escorted me to my dorm room was polite but firm. Other students watched from their windows as I stuffed my belongings into the same worn flight bag I had carried with such hope just weeks before. My flight manuals seemed to mock me now. My father's photograph felt like a reminder of promises I would never be able to keep. The drive to the academy gates felt like a funeral procession. I could see other students in my rearview mirror, probably already gossiping about the girl who thought she could fly with the big boys. But as I sat in my car outside those gates, something unexpected happened. The devastation I felt began to transform into something else, something harder, something more dangerous. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. For 3 days after my expulsion, I did not leave my apartment. I sat on my couch staring at the wall, replaying every moment of humiliation. Part of me wanted to give up, to accept that maybe they were right. Maybe I was not meant to fly. But on the fourth day, I found myself pulling out my father's military records. I had inherited them after he died, along with his medals and commendations. As I read through his service files, I discovered something I had never known. He had served with several men who were now high-ranking officers in the Air Force. Among his papers, I found a letter of recommendation he had written for me before he died. It was addressed to Colonel Michael Torres, someone he had served with in Desert Storm. The letter spoke of my passion for aviation and my father's belief that I had the heart of a true pilot. Colonel Torres was now a two-star general at Nellis Air Force Base, just outside Las Vegas. The next morning I drove to Nellis. The base was massive, with fighters taking off and landing constantly. The sound of jet engines filled the air like music. For the first time since my expulsion, I felt something other than despair. General Torres agreed to meet with me after I mentioned my father's name. He was a stern man with kind eyes who listened carefully as I told him what had happened at Elite Aviation Academy. "Sarah," he said after I finished my story, "your father was one of the finest pilots I ever knew. He saved my life twice in combat. If he believed you had what it takes to fly, then I believe it too." He leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "But I cannot just give you wings because of your father's service. You would have to earn them the same way every military pilot does, through blood, sweat, and absolute dedication." "I am ready," I said without hesitation. "The training will be harder than anything you experienced at that civilian academy. We will push you beyond your breaking point and then push you further. Many people who start this program do not finish it." I thought about Colonel Harrison's sneering face. I thought about Dr. Chambers dismissing my dreams like they were worthless. I thought about the laughter of students who watched my humiliation. "When do I start?" I asked. The next 18 months were the most difficult of my life. Military flight training was not designed for comfort or ego. It was designed to create pilots who could handle any aircraft under any conditions. Every day began before sunrise with physical training that left me exhausted before I even stepped into a cockpit. But for the first time since my father died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My instructors were tough but fair. When I struggled with a maneuver, They helped me improve instead of sabotaging my efforts. When I succeeded, they pushed me to do better. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez became my primary flight instructor. She was a fighter pilot who had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts. Unlike Colonel Harrison, she never questioned whether I belonged in the cockpit. "Mitchell," she told me after I completed a particularly challenging training flight, "you have instincts that cannot be taught. Your father would be proud." I progressed through increasingly complex aircraft. First single-engine trainers, then multi-engine transports, then advanced fighters. Each transition was a test of skill and mental toughness. Each success built my confidence and abilities. During my final phase of training, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez pulled me aside with news that made my heart stop. "Sarah, you have been selected for F-22 Raptor training. Do you understand what that means?" I could barely breathe. The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Only the most elite pilots were ever allowed to fly it. "It means I get to fly the best aircraft ever built," I managed to say. "It means much more than that. It means you are now part of the most exclusive group of pilots on Earth. There are fewer than 200 people qualified to fly the F-22. The F-22 training was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The aircraft was so advanced that it felt like flying a computer that could break the sound barrier. Every system was designed for maximum performance and lethality. Learning to master, it required complete focus and dedication. But I was no longer the same woman who had been kicked out of Elite Aviation Academy. I was now Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, United States Air Force. I wore the wings of a military pilot with pride, and I could fly aircraft that most people could only dream about. One evening, while reviewing flight schedules, I noticed something interesting. Elite Aviation Academy was hosting their annual air show in 2 weeks. It would be a celebration of their program, with demonstrations by their best graduates and current students. I walked into Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's office with a proposal that made her raise her eyebrows. "You want to do what?" she asked. "I want to request permission for a demonstration flight at a civilian air show. It would be good public relations for the Air Force." She studied me carefully. "Sarah, this would not have anything to do with your previous experience at that academy, would it?" I met her gaze steadily. "I just think it would be educational for them to see what real military aviation looks like." Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez smiled slowly. "Let me make some phone calls." The morning of the Elite Aviation Academy Air Show dawned clear and perfect for flying. I arrived at Nellis Air Force Base before sunrise to prepare for what would be the most important flight of my life. The F-22 Raptor sat in its hangar like a sleeping predator, its stealth coating absorbing the light around it. My flight suit bore the patches and insignia of a combat-qualified pilot. The weight of my helmet and oxygen mask felt familiar now, like a second skin. As I walked around the aircraft doing my pre-flight inspection, I thought about the last time I had been at Elite Aviation Academy. The scared young woman with big dreams and a worn flight bag seemed like a stranger now. "Mitchell, you ready for this?" Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez asked as she signed off on my flight plan. "I have been ready for 2 years," I replied, climbing into the cockpit. The F-22 systems came online with electronic precision. Unlike the sabotaged aircraft I had been forced to fly at the academy, every system responded exactly as designed. This was what real aviation felt like. This was what I had been denied by small-minded people who could not see past their own prejudices. The flight to Elite Aviation Academy took only minutes at the F-22's cruising speed. As I approached the airspace around the facility, I could see the air show in progress below. Small civilian aircraft were performing basic aerobatic routines for the crowd gathered on the ground. I switched to the Academy's radio frequency and listened to the commentary being broadcast for the spectators. The voice was familiar. It was Dr. Chambers, the Academy director who had expelled me. Ladies and gentlemen, our next demonstration features one of our advanced training aircraft performing precision maneuvers that showcase the skills our graduates developed during their time here at Elite Aviation Academy. I smiled inside my oxygen mask. They were about to get a demonstration they would never forget. I contacted the control tower and requested permission to enter their airspace for an unscheduled demonstration flight. The confusion in the controller's voice was obvious. Unscheduled military aircraft, please state your intentions and authorization. This is Lieutenant Mitchell, United States Air Force, requesting permission for educational demonstration flight. Authorization code Alpha 779er. There was a long pause as they verified my credentials. Meanwhile, I could see the crowd below starting to point at the sky. The F-22's distinctive silhouette was unmistakable to anyone who knew military aircraft. Lieutenant Mitchell, you are cleared for demonstration flight. Please maintain safe separation from civilian aircraft. Copy that, tower. Beginning demonstration. I pushed the F-22 into a vertical climb that made the civilian aircraft below look like toys. At 15,000 feet, I rolled inverted and pulled the aircraft through a series of maneuvers that demonstrated capabilities no civilian pilot would ever experience. The crowd below had stopped watching the scheduled demonstrations. Every face was turned skyward, watching the most advanced fighter jet in the world dance through the sky above their heads. Through the radio, I could hear Dr. Chambers trying to maintain his commentary, but his voice was strained with confusion and something that might have been fear. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have an unscheduled military demonstration joining our air show today. I dropped the F-22 into a high-speed pass over the runway, the sonic boom rattling windows and shaking the ground. The civilian aircraft that had been performing looked primitive by comparison. For the finale, I brought the F-22 around for a landing approach. This was the moment I had been dreaming about for 2 years. I was going to land on the same runway where they had humiliated me, but this time I would be emerging from the cockpit as a qualified military pilot. The touchdown was perfect, the F-22's wheels kissing the asphalt with precision that spoke of hundreds of hours of training. As I taxied toward the crowd, I could see faces I recognized. Colonel Harrison stood near the edge of the runway, his mouth hanging open in shock. Dr. Chambers was backing away from the aircraft like he was seeing a ghost. Other academy instructors were pointing and whispering to each other with expressions of disbelief. But it was the faces of the current students that gave me the most satisfaction. They were staring at the F-22 with the same wonder and longing I had once felt. They understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. I shut down the engines and prepared to open the canopy. The crowd had fallen completely silent, hundreds of people waiting to see who would emerge from the most advanced fighter jet in the world. This was my moment. This was justice. The canopy of the F-22 opened with a mechanical hiss that seemed to echo across the silent airfield. I took a moment to savor the scene below me. Hundreds of faces stared up at me with a mixture of awe and confusion. The same runway that had witnessed my humiliation was now the stage for my vindication. I removed my helmet slowly, letting my hair fall free as I stood up in the cockpit. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible even over the sound of the cooling engines. Colonel Harrison's face went white as he recognized me. Dr. Chambers took another step backward, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching panic. I climbed down from the aircraft with the confident movements of a combat-qualified pilot. My flight suit bore the patches of someone who had earned the right to fly the most advanced fighter jet in the world. The contrast between this moment and my last day at the academy could not have been more dramatic. The crowd parted as I walked toward the center of the gathered spectators. Media cameras that had come to cover a routine air show were now recording what would become a viral sensation. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the airfield. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, United States Air Force. I am qualified to fly the F-22 Raptor, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world." I paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. 2 years ago, I was a student at this academy. I was expelled after being told that I did not have what it takes to be a pilot. I was told that some people are meant to stay on the ground. I looked directly at Colonel Harrison, who seemed to be shrinking before my eyes. I was told that flying requires a level of mental toughness and technical competence that I simply did not possess. I was told that I should consider a career more suited to my limitations. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children had stopped talking. Everyone understood they were witnessing something historic. Today, I want to share a message with every person who has been told they are not good enough. Every person who has been told their dreams are too big. Every person who has faced discrimination and been made to feel small. I gestured toward the F-22 behind me. This aircraft represents the pinnacle of aviation technology. There are fewer than 200 people in the world qualified to fly it. I am one of them. Not because of my connections or my bank account, but because of my determination and my refusal to accept other people's limitations. The first person to start clapping was a young woman in the crowd, probably a current student. Her applause was quickly joined by others, building into a roar of approval that seemed to shake the very foundations of the academy. Colonel Harrison was backing away from the crowd, his face red with what looked like a mixture of shame and rage. Dr. Chambers had disappeared entirely, probably retreating to his office to figure out how to handle the public relations disaster that was unfolding. "To the students currently enrolled here," I continued, "do not let anyone tell you that you do not belong in the sky. The aircraft do not care about your gender, your background, or your bank account. They only care if you have the heart of a pilot." I walked back toward the F-22, then turned for one final comment. "And to the instructors who tried to destroy my dreams, I want you to know that your discrimination made me stronger. Your cruelty motivated me to achieve things you could never imagine. You did not break me. You forged me." The applause followed me all the way back to the aircraft. As I prepared for takeoff, I could see reporters interviewing students and spectators. Cell phone videos were already being uploaded to social media. The story would be everywhere within hours. This was no longer just about my personal vindication. This was about every underdog who had ever been told they were not good enough. As I taxied toward the runway for departure, I knew that Elite Aviation Academy would never be the same, and neither would I. The video of my speech went viral within 6 hours. By the next morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the woman who had been kicked out of pilot school and came back in an F-22. The headlines wrote themselves. From rejected student to fighter pilot, the ultimate revenge story. Woman proves doubters wrong in most spectacular way possible. Elite Aviation Academy faces backlash after viral video exposes discrimination. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from major news networks. Everyone wanted to hear the full story of how I had gone from humiliated student to combat qualified military pilot. But the most satisfying calls were the ones I received from Elite Aviation Academy. Dr. Chambers called first, his voice strained and nervous. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I hope we can discuss this situation privately. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your time here." "There were no misunderstandings," I replied calmly. "There was discrimination, sabotage, and the deliberate destruction of my dreams by people who thought they had the power to decide who belongs in aviation." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could arrange some sort of arrangement, a public apology, maybe even an honorary recognition." "Dr. Chambers, I do not need your recognition. I have the only recognition that matters, the wings of a United States Air Force pilot and the qualification to fly aircraft you could never imagine." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. The Federal Aviation Administration launched a formal inquiry into the Academy's practices. The Department of Defense reviewed their partnership agreements with civilian flight training programs. Colonel Harrison was quietly forced to resign after several former students came forward with their own stories of discrimination and sabotage. Dr. Chambers was removed as Academy Director and replaced by someone committed to fair and equal treatment of all students. But the real victory was not in their punishment. It was in the opportunities that followed. Speaking invitations poured in from aviation conferences, military academies, and universities across the country. I was asked to share my story with young women considering careers in aviation, and with anyone who had faced discrimination in male-dominated fields. The most meaningful invitation came from the Air Force Academy, where I was asked to speak to incoming cadets about perseverance and the importance of never giving up on your dreams. "You will face people who doubt you," I told a room full of future military officers. "You will encounter those who think you do not belong, but remember that their limitations are not your limitations. Their fears are not your fears, and their lack of vision is not your reality." Book publishers offered contracts for my memoir. Hollywood producers wanted to option my story for a movie. But the opportunity that excited me most was an offer to establish a scholarship fund for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to pursue aviation careers. The Sarah Mitchell Aviation Scholarship would ensure that other young people with big dreams and small bank accounts would have the chance to prove themselves in the sky. It would provide not just financial assistance, but mentorship and support to help them navigate the challenges I had faced. 6 months after my dramatic return to Elite Aviation Academy, I received a letter that made me smile. It was from a young woman named Maria Rodriguez, the first recipient of my scholarship. She had just completed her first solo flight and wanted to thank me for making her dream possible. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she wrote, "when I watched your video, I realized that being told no is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning of proving them wrong." I framed that letter and hung it in my office at Nellis Air Force Base, right next to my father's photograph and my F-22 qualification certificate. Every morning when I walk out to the flight line and see the most advanced fighter jets in the world, I remember the scared young woman who was told she would never belong in aviation. I remember the broken dreams and the tears of humiliation. But I also remember the moment I opened that canopy and proved that small-minded people cannot define the limits of determined hearts. Today, I continue to fly missions that keep our country safe. I mentor young pilots who face their own challenges and doubts, and I carry with me the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is not getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is getting everything you ever dreamed of and using it to lift others up with you. The sky belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it, and I am living proof that no one can take that away from you, no matter how hard they try.